This is Connect the World, and these are the top stories this hour. US President Donald Trump says the battle against extremism isn't a clash of religions, but between good and evil. You heard him speak in Saudi Arabia just moments ago and enlist the support of Muslim and Arab leaders in that fight. North Korea has revved up its missile testing with its second launch in less than a week. The US says it was a medium-range ballistic missile, and South Korea says it shot 500 kilometers to the east before falling into the sea. 2 people are dead after an attack on a guest house for humanitarian workers in Kabul, Afghanistan. A German woman is working for Operation Mercy. She was shot to death and an Afghan guard was beheaded. Also, a Finnish woman working for Operation Mercy was abducted. Well, before Donald Trump made his big speech to Muslim leaders, there was a lot of anticipation about how he would be received. But he already had one ringing endorsement from Egypt's president.
Mr. President, let me express our appreciation and respect, and let me say that you have a unique personality that is capable of doing the impossible. I agree.
So all the smiles as the US president met with his Egyptian counterpart. But if Donald Trump really can do the impossible, he'll have to win over the Muslim world despite everything he said about Islam before. From his infamous travel ban to telling CNN he thinks that Islam hates the US. Mr. Trump's previous rhetoric may outweigh his latest comments. However, much of his emphasis was on the overriding battle between good and evil. Well, of course, Donald Trump's reputation in the Middle East isn't just about what he says. Thanks to social media and streaming video, much of his image will be defined by exactly that, images. And some of what we're seeing is already coming under scrutiny. First of all, there was this. Was it a bend? Was it a bow? Whatever it was, many on Twitter were quick to point out that Mr. Trump slammed Barack Obama for bowing to the Saudi king in 2009. Next, there was the dancing with the swords. Now, sword dancing in Saudi is a Saudi tradition, just not one that tends to involve uncomfortable, let's call it dad dancing, by top American officials. And then there's Melania and Ivanka Trump not wearing headscarves. Now, we must point out that headscarves are not usually worn by visiting female dignitaries, but we also have to point out that Mr. Trump criticized Michelle Obama for making that same decision 2 years ago. Well, David Rhode is the New Yorker online editor and a CNN Global Affairs analyst. He joins us from New York. Great to have you with us, David. There is no doubt that this trip was high risk, high reward. This is a country that can sentence a woman for driving. They can give her public lashings for driving a car. It's a country where most of the terrorists of 9/11 came from. Is that all forgotten as President Trump carries out his visit to a country, the first of his first foreign trip overseas?
Well, that's the real question, is how will average people view this, particularly across the Muslim world? Will they believe, the rhetoric we heard today, and frankly, the statements we heard today from President Trump versus the rhetoric during the campaign? It's a dramatic change. It's a much better rhetoric, but will people, particularly young people across the Middle East, believe him?
President Trump spoke of a new global center for combating extremist ideology. Is that hard to get your head around in a country that readily flogs bloggers who promote freedom of speech?
Yes, they chose Saudi Arabia as the location of the speech. I think part of that was for domestic concerns. He could announce this big arms sale to Saudi Arabia. Some of the earlier commentators from CNN had talked about, CNN Domestic had talked about, Jordan may have been a better setting for this speech. Many Muslims that I've spoken to do not see Saudi Arabia as the leader of the Muslim world. Yes, the 2 holy mosques are there, but there is no papacy in Islam, as international viewers know. And so, that's the problem. It is the setting, particularly that opulent room with all these many, wealthy and autocratic Gulf rulers. Is that the right setting to give this message from, or does that actually undermine the credibility of President Trump's message today?
Absolutely. Well, he also sort of said that America will not impose our way of life on others, but rather outstretch our hands. Do you think that was his way, or at least his speechwriter's way, of avoiding any real comment on human rights abuses?
Yeah, I think there was an intentional effort, and this was a message to the rulers in the region, that human rights will not matter to this administration. They've telegraphed that by welcoming President Sisi of Egypt to the White House. What will average people in the region, how will they interpret that? He did talk about growth and jobs, and I think that is the critical, issue for people in the region. But there was no how in this speech. He talked about driving the extremists out of the mosque. He talked about creating more jobs. He talked about ushering a new renaissance. How? Every American president has talked about this since 9/11. U.S. tried invasions under George W. Bush. The U.S. tried to sort of step back and do less in the region under Barack Obama. Neither worked. I don't hear a new Trump sort of doctrine for how to drive extremists from the mosque.
Of course, we heard a lot about investment there, the US and Saudi agreeing to this $110 billion arms agreement. There are, of course, concerns about financing and weapons getting into the hands of extremists. How can President Trump ensure that doesn't happen?
I think that, well, the primary concern in terms of these sales to Saudi Arabia is that Obama made an enormous sale to Saudi Arabia, $60 billion, and the American-made planes and bombs were used to kill as many as 2,000 civilians in Yemen. To be fair, military force is unquestionably, one of the things you need to use to counter extremism, but you don't hear much about, any other efforts to counter it. And there is a danger in Syria, as you've noted, possibly arming the Kurds or local fighters. Where will those weapons end up? And that's what's missing here. What will the American role actually be? Saudi Arabia can't go in and sort of lead the fight in Syria against ISIS, and the fight in Iraq is being led by Iraqi forces. How are we going to back them? I think a better message would have been a clearer, stronger, more consistent U.S. U.S. support for local governments, local moderates, that we will stand by them consistently. The U.S. has a tendency of diving into the region and then walking away from it, but that we will consistently back moderates in a very, very long struggle against terrorism. That's what is needed, is a sort of steady hand, not new rhetoric.
David Rhode, certainly a lot more to unpack here, but we'll have to leave it there for now. Great to have your analysis. Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, there was one country that was definitely not invited to that meeting in Saudi Arabia, Iran. The hosts want the White House to take a much tougher line on Iran. Remember, the Saudis themselves have severed ties with Tehran. But while those doors may be closed, Iran seems to want to open them. Its moderate president, Hassan Rouhani, was just re-elected in a landslide win by voters who want to see him open up to the world. Well, let's cross now to Fredrick Pleitgen, who's in Iran's capital, Tehran, for us this hour. Fred, good to have you there on the ground for us. President Trump gave the Saudis pretty much what they wanted to hear, an anti-Iran message. How will his words be received there?
Well, I think there's going to be a lot of anger here in Iran at some of the things that President Trump said there, especially towards the end of his speech, when he spoke about what he called the effects that Iran was having here in this region, and that Iran was one of the main supporters of terrorism in this region. Of course, people here and the government here have a very different take on all of that. They believe that it's the Saudi ideology, the Saudi Wahhabi ideology, that's causing a lot of the instability in the Middle East, also causing a lot of the extremism in the Middle East as well. They're highly critical here, for instance, of the Saudi role in Yemen as well, saying that a lot of the bombing that's going on in Yemen by the Saudi Air Force and its allies as well is killing a lot of civilians, leading to a famine in that country. So certainly the Iranians are saying, look, we have a different take on things. That doesn't mean we're the source of instability here in this region. And the other thing that the Iranians will point to is that they actually just had an election here in this country and just elected or re-elected a moderate president, someone who wants to engage with the West, someone who wanted or who did engage with the U.S. to bring about the nuclear agreement that may not be perfect, but certainly did curb large parts of Iran's nuclear ambitions. And the Iranians want sanctions relief as well. And one of the things that Hassan Rouhani is trying to do is he's trying to integrate Iran into the international community more to make sure that there isn't these problems with the international community. So certainly the Iranians will be very, very angry at some of the things that President Trump has said. They will feel that President Trump is taking sides with Saudi Arabia in a conflict that, of course, has defined this region for quite some time, Linda.
And Fred, just briefly, as a result of that election, we saw huge celebrations there. One analyst said you often see days of euphoria followed by long years of disillusionment. Given Rouhani has a much stronger mandate, how much power does he really have, given the supreme leader ultimately rules over him?
Yeah, he certainly has a stronger mandate, and you do often see Iranian presidents in their second term do a lot more than they were able to do in their first term. However, he does have very limited capabilities and very limited powers, because in the end, it is Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who has the final say on policy, especially when it comes to security policy and military policy here in this country. However, in the sphere of economics, Hassan Rouhani does certainly wield a lot of power, and really what this election in the end was about was the economic way forward for this country. Do they want to integrate into the world economy? Are they going to welcome foreign investment and try to set the stage for foreign investment by, of course, entering into negotiations, or do what the hardliners wanted to do, cope with that isolation and say we don't necessarily need foreign investment, we don't need outside help, we'll try to grow internally. Clearly, the electorate here in this country has decided that they want more integration into the world's economy and that they want more investment from abroad. And that, of course, also means they want to open up to the world as well, Linda.
All right, Fredrick Pleitgen, great to have you on the ground there in Tehran for us to get perspective there. We appreciate it.